This episode of Simple Civics Greenville County is brought to you by Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, providing free books to children 0 to 5 throughout Greenville County. To sign up, visit greenvillefirststeps.org/freebooks. That's greenvillefirststeps.org/freebooks.
School funding in South Carolina is more complicated than just about any state in the country. How do we as a community make sure that our local public schools have the resources that they need to hire great teachers, provide the most effective academic programs, and keep our children safe? I'm Catherine Schumacher of Public Education Partners, and today on Simple Civics EdTalks, we are going to start a 3-part deep dive into public education funding in our state, and especially how it impacts Greenville County schools. Today, we'll start with an overview of different sources of school funding with a particular focus on state and local revenues. I'm joined by Derek Lewis, Executive Director of Greenville First Steps and a former Greenville County Schools trustee. Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Simple Civics Ed Talks. This is going to be the first of a 3-part series about school funding in South Carolina with a particular focus on how that impacts Greenville and the work that we do here with Greenville County Schools. So happy to be here with my colleague and former Greenville County Schools trustee, Derek Lewis.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So we know how important this is. It's really critical. We're going to be getting into budget season really soon. And so we thought it's a complicated topic and we wanted to sort of spend some time. So what do you think, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, it is such a big topic. And, the budget drives all the things that the district does. And unfortunately, there's just some misinformation or, candidates using information for their own benefit that I think it's just good to just kind of put some objective information out there and let people understand it and better understand the processes that go on.
Right. So this first episode, just so you guys know what's coming. So today we're going to kind of do an overview, big picture, and then we're going to have some follow-up episodes that look in particular at a few special factors that have, an outsized impact on what we do here in South Carolina, which is weird. We may title these podcasts "Why School Funding is Weird in South Carolina," but particularly here in Greenville. So we're going to talk about Act 388, which if you've ever paid attention to the tax conversation here, you've heard that term. So we're going to kind of unpack that. And then we're going to talk about tax abatement programs like fee in lieu of tax agreements or FILOTs, which is another term that you have certainly heard and seen in the news. And those FILOs are part of incentive packages for local economic development or redevelopment. And they're really important, but they're really complicated and they do have an impact on our schools. So we're going to take all of these topics and kind of break them down and try and make it sort of simple. And then we're going to point you in the direction of other resources that can help you if you want more information. So that is also something that we want to do. Derek, let's get started.
Maybe we'll just start with like some big picture things, because I think one of the things that really shocked me as a board member that I had to remind myself over and over is really important is that 1 out of every 10 kids in South Carolina goes to Greenville County Schools. And so, yes, it's a $1 billion organization, but it's 1/10 of the entire state's education budget because this district is just so big compared to other districts. I mean, we're the 43rd largest district in the country. And so, the numbers are huge because the number of kids that we serve are huge.
And that's not a bad thing. Like in Greenville, it allows us to do a lot of really special things. And it's important for everybody to remember that all of this funding makes good things possible for kids.
I mean, you
in
think
Greenville
about
County.
things like the Fine Arts Center or the Roper Mountain Science Center. I mean, there's just stuff happening in this district that we would never be able to do in a district 1/5 of our size.
Right.
So, in South Carolina, there's really kind of 3 sources of funding. There's the federal money that usually comes through the state and gets passed on to us. It has a whole bunch of strings to it. A good example of that is like how our school lunch programs are funded. And then there is this state money that comes from the state to the school district. And then there are local dollars that are raised usually through millage increases or through property taxes.
Right. And so the state is usually about 75%, and the local is, 25, 30%. That's how it's supposed to go out. What's unusual about how we do things in South Carolina is that, we fund operations for local schools differently. And so especially for listeners who are new to South Carolina, we do things differently here. And, most states in the country fund their school districts through local property taxes on your house that you live in. But here in South Carolina, that changed significantly back in 2006 with a law called Act 388. And so we're the only state or one of the very few states in the country, and Derek is more of an expert on this than I am, but really, like, we're one of the only states in the country that does not use your house, the owner-occupied home property taxes, to pay for education. So as I said, we're going to do a deep dive on Act 388 on a future podcast, but we really can't have a conversation about school funding in South Carolina without starting there.
Yeah, so I mean, the one thing that I think is amazing is, I mean, 2006 was just 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But we talk about it like this thing was like written to the Constitution
Right.
with our, with our forefathers.
Well, it's become sort of a third rail. And I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's because it's complicated.
And
as
it
we're
is
gonna
amazing
learn.
to me, like, as you talk to elected officials, there are people who wrote Act 388 who say, I don't really love it. I didn't really do
Yeah.
what I thought it was going to do.
It was passed really quickly and put together. Like when you look at the timeline of it, it moved really fast. So talk a little bit about, what that means, sort of break that down a little bit.
Yes, I mean, if you go way back in time to 2006,
Back in the dark
I mean,
ages.
I think one of the things that happened was there was a real big push from the beach
The
areas
coastal
of the
areas.
country, of the
Yep.
state, to remove property taxes from those homes. And so a lot of those chambers of commerce and really the realtor associations who represented kind of Hilton Head, Myrtle Beach, Charleston said, we've got to transfer these costs in a different way because our houses are too expensive. And so they pushed Act 388 really through the General Assembly with the promise that we would help eliminate property taxes for owner-occupied homes, and in exchange, we would just have the state cover it through sales tax. And so on paper, it was a pretty even swap. We're just going to do this instead of that.
Well, in theory, and it passed really quick. I mean, it was a 6-month. If I read correctly, it was sort of introduced and then passed in like quick. And often things that pass quick are not fully thought through. So, one of the things I wanted folks to see is when you actually look at your tax bill. So if you have one handy, we encourage you to pull it out and take a look at it. So why don't you explain kind of what people see on their tax bill here in Greenville County?
Yeah, so this is the tricky thing because the tax bill tells you one thing, and then if you look at another section, it tells you something different. So if you look at your property tax bill, there's actually a section that says allocation of tax money, and under it, it says Greenville County Schools, and it's usually like 65% of your taxes are going to Greenville County Schools. But if you look in the lower section, it'll say under amount due, school tax credit savings, or sometimes it'll say homestead exemption. And basically what it's saying to you is, well, yeah, you owe that, but we're going to forgive it. And so if you only look at the top part of your bill, you would think you're paying 65% of your taxes to your school district, but the state is actually exempting you from that, giving you a credit, and then charging you in sales tax to offset that.
So the idea was, there was going to be the 1 cent sales tax, penny tax, and then the idea was that was going to add to the general fund, and then the money was going to go back to school districts. But then, and here's the catch, if there wasn't enough money created by the sales tax, the general fund was going to make up the difference. And that was a really important part of the bill. And that is the part that got almost immediately kind of messy because immediately we had the Great Recession of 2007.
Yeah, I mean, that's the amazing thing is you think about like this passed in 06, and 24 months later, we're telling school districts we don't have enough money to pay your bills. And not just school districts, but every state agency was being told.
Understandably, I mean, it was a big economic, crisis.
And the thing I remember, way back those days is, that like most state agencies could scale back their workforce by just delivering fewer services. But those kids still showed up for second grade, whether or not we were in a recession or not. And so school districts in particular, because so much of the school district budget is in teacher salaries, didn't really have the ability to furlough teachers. They had those people had to still show up every day. And so it put a huge hole in how we fund education in 08. And really,
We've
we're
never made it up.
still kind of trying to come out of that hole.
Yeah. And I think that's, another thing we can sort of talk about as we sort of transition to sort of how we've tried to address that over the last decades. How do you do the math to send money back?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? And how can a local government manage that difference? So how is the math done to kind of move money back from the state to the local districts? And how did that gap start to grow?
Well, so generally what happens, I mean, if you kind of go back to the Education Finance Act, I mean, the idea was like we're going to fund what it costs to run a school, and then we're going to pass that money on to a school district. And generally that number is it costs $1 million. We're going to give you $1 million, and everybody is going to be happy. But then they realized that the General Assembly, if sales tax collections were low, which is how we're going to fund schools, then that also means that the available general fund balance is also low. So when they don't have the money in sales tax, they also probably don't have the money in fund balance that they can assign to schools. And so it was a double no, right? I can't do the thing I've told you I would do, and I can't do the backup thing either.
So bottom line is there's been a gap that has been growing and growing, and the districts are supposed to have the freedom and opportunity to sort of make up that gap. And again, that's the sort of thing, like we'll talk more about how they've sort of struggled to meet that gap, but they've then changed the formula again a couple of years ago. And I think it's important for listeners to understand too, these changes, particularly the last round of changes to how schools are funded, weren't done through legislation. They were done through provisos. And provisos are 1-year add-ons to the budget that have the weight of law, but actually don't go through that whole sausage-making process where people get to provide feedback and their committee hearings and all of that. So it's kind of thrown in at the last minute. And because this is such a complicated topic, it's been easier for the legislature to kind of get stuff through and change things on that proviso level. I want to give some credit. I really do want to give credit to the legislature and Governor McMaster. They have really made an effort to try and increase teacher salaries in the last several years in particular. It's a real priority. They talk about it a lot. But the challenge is that all of that growth and the money that they are sending back, even to Greenville, it is not enough to cover the growth, the kind of salary increases we want to do, the increasing cost of benefits. That's where that tension lies. So I think that's one of the things that's it really is really challenging.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. And you have definitely seen the state say we need to increase teacher pay, for example, in ways that we were not talking about 10 years ago. And so it is really exciting to be in a time where the General Assembly is trying to do those things. You know, the challenge is just we are also trying to do things that we're not fully funding, assuming that particularly our larger school districts are going to pick up the difference through a millage increase, but we exempted homes from millage increases.
Right. So that means that millage increase is really landing on rental properties and small business owners.
Yep. And your vehicles.
And vehicles, yes.
And so those are really going to be the three things. And so imagine if we looked at Greenville County and a map of Greenville County, and you blacked out every owner-occupied home, and all that was left was businesses and your cars and rental properties.
Right. Except some of the biggest businesses are also exempted because of FILOTs and some of those other incentive packages.
And so a flower shop ends up paying the cost of an entire neighborhood's school fees that weren't covered by the General Assembly.
Right. So we talked about, you've heard about FILOs. There was a lot of debate in the spring. County Council was exploring different ways to use the money generated by FILOs, fee in lieu of taxes. Those are special incentives that are an important part of economic development in our community. That is another area of debate. It's another area where the district gets some resources. And it's another piece of the very complicated funding puzzle. We're going to do a whole FILO episode, but we're going to be starting to talk about the county council budget soon, and we're going to be talking about the school district budget soon. So it lands on the local school board trustees to figure out how to make the math. What does that look like? What is the process by which Millage, the local school district school board of trustees, which has taxing authority, how do you balance all of that?
That's the tricky thing with Act 388 is what it said. I think what it said more than anything that affects Greenville is this is how much the General Assembly is supposed to give you to do the things the General Assembly says you have to do.
The mandates.
And then there's a difference. And the only way you can cover that difference is by going to your local millage. And then they said, and so to do that, here is local millage that you can and should raise in order to cover the difference.
Which is way higher
Yeah.
than anything that is politically feasible, particularly here in Greenville.
Yeah, and so, that's been one of the things that I was really impressed with at the district level is particularly when we went through the budgeting process. Most times of the 8 years I was on the board, every time the superintendent came to us, he actually presented us a balanced budget that said, in February, this is what I need to do. This is how much it's going to cost. This is the services I can deliver for the amount of money I'm going to have available. Then the General Assembly would say, well, but we also want you to make these changes, and we're not fully funding that. And then he would have to come back to us in April and say, well, never mind. Those things I said we're going to do, now we have to do these things with less money, and now we have to raise the millage.
Or if we want to give teachers a raise. So, we hear a lot, again, great news for teachers in South Carolina. There's a lot of talk about raising the starting salary for teachers and adding money to each part of the teacher salary schedule. But in Greenville, again, because of our size, because we're growing so quickly, because we're having to add teachers, and we're already kind of ahead of the curve on salaries. So in order to do a lot of often teacher raises, adding staff positions last year, adding special ed teachers was a real priority. Adding school counselors has been a priority. So, the available, so to speak, millage might be, 12, 15, 20 mil. It could be 20 mils. But instead, our district is like, well, let's figure out how much we can do for the best investment we can get. And so last year, there was no millage increase. The year before there, it was one of 9, I think. So it really varies, and it almost never hits that number that, the General Assembly would say, or that they would say, this is the number you have available.
Yeah. Yeah. One example I would give of kind of an unfunded mandate that affects that is like one year the General Assembly needed to shore up the state retirement system. And so they said, we're giving out more money in retirement benefits than we're collecting in retirement fees, which is a problem with pensions all over the country. And so to fix it, they increased what they called the employer contribution.
Right. And the employer is Greenville County Schools.
Yeah. We are, again, we're 10th of the state's education workforce. So to turn to the employer and say, we need you to increase, I think we had to increase our employer contribution by like $5 million.
Yeah, millions of dollars.
So a $5 million increase in the employer contribution to the state retirement system that was unfunded is a $5 million increase on your taxes.
Dr. Royster often says we're in the people business in Greenville County Schools, and that's how you take care of your people. But it's a real balancing act, and I think generally speaking, the administration and the trustees do a good job of that. And obviously, it's something people talk about a lot. So, want to wrap up on sort of this part of the conversation, this kind of overview piece. The budget process is already getting started for next fiscal year. So next fiscal year will start July 1, 2026. The district is starting to, collect information from principals about what they need. The legislature will start having their conversations this fall. County council is already starting to have their conversations, which could impact what's going on with the school district. So part of the reason what's so great about Simple Civics Greenville County and Simple Civics EdTalks is we really want to help you all kind of pay attention to the process. So I really encourage you to keep an eye on resources on the PEP website. We're going to be providing some information about all of this in addition to linking to these podcasts and some other resources. The League of Women Voters is getting ready to push out some really great new information modules. And they're going to have a little video that covers a lot of these same topics. So if you're a visual learner, you'll be able to enjoy that. But we really just want to try and break this down a little bit. So that's it for this first deep dive into school funding here in South Carolina and how it impacts Greenville County Schools. Please share this information, especially when there's, when you see stuff in the press, when you see stuff in the media. And don't forget, reach out. There are places to sort of share your questions in the show notes and things like that. So thanks, Derek. Always fun to be a public education nerd with you.
Thanks.
Simple Civics EdTalks is a joint project of Greater Good Greenville, Greenville First Steps, and public education partners Greenville County.
Hi, Simple Civics Greenville County listeners, Nathaniel here. If you've made it this far, then we think you'll really love our newsletter. Sign up for bonus content, updates, and more right in your inbox. Look for the link in the description that says newsletter to sign up, or visit us at simplecivicsgreenvillecounty.org. Find the link in the menu that says newsletter and sign up there. We'll see you again next week.